Right. I guess I'm just going to go live right away and say hello, everyone. And I hope you're all doing well. And I suppose I might as well kind of jump in as soon as possible because we've got a lot to go through. I don't know whether or not we'll ever end up finishing this entire video, but, you know, it's certainly worthwhile. Hello, Edward Giannone. Yeah, don't have too many viewers today. I wonder if that's because we're doing it on a different day from usual. I by the way, I feel like for some reason I don't remember having. Oh, I think I know why. Yeah, I think it's because basically my headphones is falling apart. This is duct tape. So Jordan Peterson, Surrounded. That is what we're looking at today, and I think we should jump in. And we'll see if some more people. Oh, I can see some of you. Hello, there's 6 people watching. So hi. Don't forget to smash the like button on your way in. That's really appreciated. And I'm going to slightly angle my way down. Yeah, I'm in a bit of a strange mood today, but we won't talk about that right now because we really just want to jump into things. Hello, Chris. All right, so Jordan Peterson, Jubilee. So I guess there's like a few things to say about this. One thing right out the gate, of course, is that this was originally called Christian versus Atheist. And the problem is that Jordan Peterson is by no reasonable metrics an atheist. Sorry, a Christian. And they then have changed the title to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. I guess something really interesting, which is that last week I did a video called I think basically I titled it Ex-Christian explains why he's not a Christian anymore, but I put ex-Christian in quotation marks, and that annoyed a lot of people in the comments. So like, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't assume that this person or allow for the possibility that this person wasn't actually a Christian. And the implication was that I'm just saying that because it was Pologia, the person I was responding to, they claim to have left Christianity. I will say, for the record, that I think that there are many people who claim to currently be Christians where you should put the Christian in quotation marks. So if anyone gets offended by me putting ex-Christian in quotation marks, that's not me like having a go at atheists. That's me having a go at the tendency for a lot of people to identify themselves as Christian when they're in no meaningful sense, one. And that's, I think, what we're going to see with Jordan Peterson. I'll just say hello to the new people here. So, well, I think it's just hello, Matsumura. And I think I already said hello to Chris. So, let's do this the old-fashioned way. Share screen. Tab. Share. Is this looking good? All right. Yeah, I think, is this how I feel like there's a, do I like this? Is this a better way of doing it? I think I prefer this. I think, I can't remember what the established system is. Oh, by the way, let me know how the volume is and everything like that. Let's jump in.
You're a Christian.
You say that.
Not
So I'm going to skip the
first claim. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
I really feel like this is going to be one of those things we have to speed it up just slightly, but we'll see. So out of the right out the gate, I think that like that statement is kind of I feel like the answer could be, well, yeah, but isn't that a problem with, like, I mean, I'm not arguing as an atheist here, but if I were an atheist, I'd say, well, you're right. I don't understand what I'm objecting to because maybe I consider the concept of God incoherent, or I consider God to mean so many different things to so many different people that it's basically a meaningless concept. So there's actually a way you could swing this to be a point in favor of atheism. But yeah, we'll see.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on.
This would be an example of someone who would not be considered an ex-Christian.
Long retreats deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
I mean, yeah, this gets into an interesting point, because if you were a Christian, you could say, well, yeah, the reason why you don't understand the God that you're rejecting is because, you know, Catholicism has a false God. So you wouldn't understand what you're rejecting. And that's something you could say it to a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu, or rather an ex-Muslim or ex-Hindu or ex-Jew. You could say, well, the God you followed wasn't the true God. And of course, a Muslim could say the same thing. Like if, someone was a Christian and they said, well, I believed in Jesus and read the Bible, and yet you're telling me that I didn't know God. And of course, the Muslim could say, well, yeah, you didn't, because you didn't know the true God. So I guess that's the thing. This would be more meaningful if Jordan Peterson was committed to a particular religious view.
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
That's really funny. You were wrong before. So, I mean, it's I guess a valid point.
What was
whatever.
off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out.
Well,
But
then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're
I really want to be aggressive with skipping. Would anyone object? Because I don't want to spend how long? Hour 28. I don't want to even be doing this for more than one video. I mean, I don't even want to be doing this for a full video necessarily. I'm just because I just feel like so much of this format is just back and forth nonsense. Yeah.
the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's obviously a
Okay.
generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God. It's a generic claim. In your case, it has to be specified more.
I don't know.
So
Is it?
What do you
Hello,
mean?
hello. I didn't mean to do that. I was just wondering whether or not it was worth trying to do fast forward skip. But I think we'll just skip through.
now, story.
This particular
Okay,
says
so
something
I
that we can't.
I barely care about this claim at all, but I really don't care what this guy has to say. So let's see.
Good.
No, we're not.
So God, in their
Oh,
finitude,
now they got a little the red flag meter goes up.
have to be. That is to pursue.
We want
I
the
infinite.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I'm
David.
wondering
David,
where
good
this
to
could
see you.
possibly go.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, Lono.
This is okay. I'm interested.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian.
I don't know. He sounds actually very normal though. The one time I chose to do an impression of him, and he sounded like a perfectly regular dude.
Deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm rejecting
believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything
Do you
about.
believe in Lono?
Yeah, I mean, well, see, this is getting at the point which I literally said right from the start, which is that this isn't necessarily a meaningful criticism of atheism, right? Because there's lots of things that I don't understand that I reject. And perhaps both the reason why I don't understand them and why I reject them is that I don't know much about them. But that doesn't mean that I'm wrong. There's lots of things that I just couldn't possibly know anything about. And that doesn't mean you can't learn every single part of human history. But I guess what Jordan Peterson is kind of saying is, well, there's a difference between rejecting and simply not believing. The problem with that is that then you get into the whole conversation about how are you defining atheism. I do think it makes sense to define atheism as an active rejection, or basically the belief that God does not exist, because I think that's simply a more useful way. And I think it's a bit weaselly when people say, oh, I'm just saying I'm not convinced he does. Well, okay, in that case, that sounds more like agnosticism.
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument. And unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
I guess so. The point there from Peterson would be, well, because atheists are aware of some concept of God, it's almost so essentially, I guess what he's saying is that in order, his criticism of atheism is that they are aware of God, such that in being aware of him, or whatever, the concept of God, they are able to reject it, but then they don't understand it. And he's saying, well, in the case of Mono, the Polynesian god, I reject it because I don't know about it, which is not necessarily rejecting it in the first place. But if I were to, I guess he's saying, if I lived in a Polynesian society where everyone was talking about Mono, I would expect to understand him much better, or her. I don't know. I don't know what kind of god Mono is.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated accurately.
Do you believe
Yeah, this format is inherently cooked. Yeah, that's my thoughts. Again, for me, I don't know how. It's something I always think about whenever I look at this format. I think, what would I have as my statements if I was on here, for example, as a Christian? And it's just, the format's not great because you talk to all these people and you have to come up with a sentence or a statement that is sufficiently obviously true that you feel like you could defend it when you're surrounded by 20 people. Like, you're not going to go for something really tenuous as one of your statements, because then you might end up looking like an idiot. But you also want to go for something that's not so obviously true that no one could possibly disagree with you.
Believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question.
All right, skipping
For the
this.
world,
We are
Mhm.
over here other than the universe.
Idea of polysemy, where we have
I feel like I know this guy. He's been in other stuff.
multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state.
Okay, whatever. 1 gender critical versus 20 trans allies. Even then, like, it would be really difficult to come up with a good statement like that's kind of, you can actually have a meaningful, productive discussion about. Like, I'm not even sure what my questions would be.
And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol,
Okay.
or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God. But I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa.
I mean, yeah, I don't. This. So is Jordan Peterson's point genuinely that God is such a complicated idea and there are so many different ways that God could be used, and that's like why atheists don't understand what that? Because the way this guy's talking implies like he's responding to that objection. In which case, that's not a good objection for like Peterson to be making in the first place. I feel like I had something else to say, but I can't think of it right away. So let's just power through.
Is moving
Something else.
emotionally.
What was it?
But I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
what literal way?
the way.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. Yeah, sorry, I realized. The thing that might have been interesting and that you could maybe have expected, Jordan Peterson seems quite bored, disappointed, and a little bit angry, not gonna lie. I think, like, I don't know. I feel like maybe Jordan Peterson is one of those people who says cryptic things and then gets annoyed when people don't understand, like, don't pick up on what he's meaning. I'm not sure. It's weird because I would say it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out situation. If you give a silly nonsense statement, then you're not likely to achieve very much. It says, how familiar are you with Peterson and his opinions? Honestly, not very. So the main things I know about Peterson, kind of two aspects to it, very related. The first is his tendency to say, the classic, "Oh, do I believe in this?" Oh, so I think the actual the official quote is, "Did this happen?" He's like, "Did this happen? That depends what you mean by did and this and happen." So essentially, his shtick is massively stressing, or like basically trying to obfuscate things by focusing on how words can have ambiguous meanings. And I'm not saying there's never any utility to that, but I think he does it in a way which comes across as unhelpful, and it doesn't work towards a greater understanding. I think sometimes it is worth having a conversation about people's presuppositions and the value that they place on truth and the way they understand. Hello, I almost choked on my words. Yeah, understand certain truth or certain words. But I think he seems to do it in a way which is excessive. And what else was I going to say about the old Jordan Peterson? And the other thing is, I do, as far as I know, he seems to be believe in a very, like, essentially, he seems to think that you should believe in God because it's useful for society and for yourself. And that actually allows me to segue quite well to what I was going to say, which is I'm kind of surprised that the angle he's not going down here when he says atheists reject God and they don't understand what they're rejecting is a kind of a thing that people have claimed, which is that belief in universal human rights is extends from us having been endowed those rights by a creator, and that therefore if you reject those things, kind of like a presuppositionalist argument essentially, that actually a lot of what we take for granted in terms of science and morality comes from a belief in God, and that if you get rid of the belief in God, then you lose that foundation. And if he'd have said that, that would be more interesting. I think he should have phrased it less ambiguously if that were the case. But of course, that doesn't seem to be what he said. I don't know. Has anyone like just asked him point blank, what exactly did you mean to say by this statement? Yeah, not sure if you already mentioned this. Yes, I did already mention this. And it is very much, it's literally like the first thing I said. And yeah, you're right to point it out as significant. Let's see. Mona Lisa can't move because he is only in 2D. God is in 4D. Atheism destroys with facts and logic. That is true. Yeah, God. Yeah. How many dimensions is oh, I guess he's not bound by space. Oh, silly guy. Anyway. Oh, hello. We got a spam bot. We never have spam bots here. I guess it doesn't. I can just remove spam bots. Isn't that convenient? Wow, what a world we're in. I suppose I should have blocked them too. I feel like something else I should have done. No, let's just. Oh, I think we should skip. That's what we should do.
Hey, that idea.
Believe that there's an underlying thing.
Can we memory?
How-
What are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you.
Okay, I'm getting at the fact. So I want to. Okay, I need to go back because someone just asked a very important question. What are you getting at?
To help you determination of whether partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Okay.
I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
Oh, that's such a knob thing to say. You're just uncomfortable with the question. Oh, look, I'm gonna have to show you guys something. Like before this video is over, there's something I need to show you, which is a conversation I had with an avowed atheist in my comment section, where they were just as annoying as this. But yeah, okay, let's see. Oh, by the way, I should say we were supposed to do a different video this today. It's just I thought, let's be honest. Everyone and their mother's talking about this. What am I trying to do? Front like I'm not at least vaguely attempting to grow, a YouTube channel. I think my main motivation for wanting to get a few more views, clicks on buttons, don't forget to hit that like button. It's just because it's more entertaining if the chat's a bit more active. That's my real goal in life. I don't care about anything else except for having an active chat.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I saw a video, like a live stream channel by someone, doesn't matter who, but someone I follow, and they only had like 100 views for the live stream, which isn't that many. I mean, obviously, I think I've at least hit 20 once on here, so already got within a fifth of them. But they had like a real the chat was just whizzing by, and I was like, oh wow, there's no lurkers there. And I thought that sounds like fun.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
So I would say my brain and my intuition. Like if I was arguing from his perspective, I'd say my brain and my intuition. So
logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
It's one of those things where you kind of like you're getting into way too difficult of a question. Like that's kind of my problem with a lot of the presuppositional stuff. If you really get into the nitty gritty of it, it's not that rhetorically useful, because like you can sit there and you can say, well, what is it that makes you think something is actually true? But I mean, there's a quote by Sam Harris that I will use to no end because I think it's a really useful quote. Basically talks about striking philosophical bedrock with the shovel of a stupid question. I think a lot of people, like when you really try and get down to it, if you find yourself having to interrogate someone on this point, they're not going to be receptive to it. I think you can casually bring up the fact that theism may be a better foundation for claims like that there is an ultimate truth in the universe, that truth is knowable, and that we should want to know that truth. That is something I think you can say. But if you're like having a conversation with someone and you're like grilling them on, why do you think truth exists? Why do you think you should know that truth? Why do you think you should want to know that truth? And you're really like trying to get them to understand something. You're never going to like, there's zero chance that atheist is going to say, well, I don't know. I guess it must be God. Like, it's not going to happen. It could, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to read this comment because this is apparently explaining Jordan Peterson's. So his understanding of God is more about how God is foundationally the hierarchical framework through which we interact with the world. So when he says that atheists don't understand what they reject, it's because they are rejecting their own hierarchical framework that they unwittingly live by. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Like, he can have his own kind of mystical beliefs. The problem is, it's almost arrogant, right, to come on and be like, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, and then it's like, oh, what are they rejecting? It's like, specifically my weird kind of like almost like pseudo cultish, hey, God is like reality and reason. What is like this, that God is this hierarchical framework. And it's like, this would be a much more meaningful conversation if this was between a Christian who says, I believe that God created the universe and he is triune and he came down to earth through Jesus Christ to live a perfect life and give his life for our sins. Basically, like there's like clear statements there. Whereas here it's kind of like, I mean, you're just redefining God to this very specific thing that you care about. I just don't think that's very useful. Yeah. He speaks, engage with him and call it, people who aren't willing to engage with him call it word salad. I think like there's this fine line, and there always is, between is someone explaining a difficult concept or are they talking nonsense? The problem is if you go really hardcore in the direction of saying, oh, anytime someone seems to be talking nonsense, that's because they're actually explaining something really sophisticated and you just can't understand it because you're pleb tier. That's how you end up justifying lots of postmodernist ideas. But yeah, obviously you don't want to go really hardcore the other way. What have I missed so far? Not that much, to be honest. So I will say one thing. Oh, hello, Loris Tyrell. Where does he claim to reject any hierarchy, though? I'm not sure who you're talking about there. Sorry. Michael, what do you think of calling God she? I think that it would not be really consistent with Christianity. I think there is a perfectly reasonable argument to be made that the use of the male pronoun in the Bible is because ultimately, these are human beings talking about God, and back in those days they didn't really use the singular they that much. So I think it is possible that God himself doesn't care whether he's being referred to by male pronouns or not. And that's just like a human way that we relate to him. But yeah, if you're a Christian, I don't think there's any point like directly going against that convention and starting to use she. Ultimately, I don't think there's anything like if you would say, well, I'm not convinced of Christianity, but I still think God exists. And well, maybe then you have some particular reason why you might think God is a she, or that's appropriate. Yeah, it's not something I care too much about, but yeah, it's not something I would really do. Anyway, you might have noticed, by the way, I used to not look at. I was like, oh, I won't look at the comments while I'm responding to stuff, but I've realized it's actually quite useful to do that, because otherwise, like when I try and go back through the comments like afterwards, which is what I was thinking I might be able to do, it just doesn't work very well. This is something I haven't watched it yet. I watched some of it, and it seemed to me like a lot of the content was just saying, I don't care about this issue, which is of course not very compelling. Right.
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you can imagine.
Wherever you listen, search surround.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Okay. So that's again one of the. So this statement, I would definitely agree with. Even if I were an atheist, I would agree with this statement because I would say, well, there is more to an atheistic worldview than science. So this doesn't mean, like, it's significant here. He's not even saying morality and purpose cannot be found within atheism. Like, there's no reason why an atheist would need to object to this. An atheist could say, yeah, you're right. Science, like the scientific method as a means to make observations about how the natural world is, cannot give us a moral framework that tells us what we ought to do. It could inform it. We could say, I think that we should, feed starving, or like, I think we should do as much as we can to cure cancer. Or, I mean, good luck curing cancer without science. So obviously science can help us achieve certain ethical aims and tell us what we ought to do in order to achieve certain ethical aims, but science can't tell us what the ethical aims could be or should be. But there are many, many atheists who would agree with that sentiment too. So yeah, you're saying, okay, I kind of contradicted you, Edward Giannoni, because you said that's a really good statement. It's an interesting statement. The limitation of it, as I just said, is that an atheist doesn't need to disagree with it. Like, an atheist could stand up and say, actually, I think you're right. And yeah, but I have another means of establishing morality or a sense of purpose. He says at a later point that they have other gods at the bottom of their hierarchy. So this is, I assume, talking about atheists. You need to stop using so many ambiguous pronouns, Loris. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a thing people say. If you are, like, everyone has a god. So if you are an atheist, then that means your god is money or science or fame or whatever. Which, I mean, it's one of those things where, again, like, if you take that literally, you're kind of reducing the concept of God to sort of meaninglessness. It's a good conversation starter, I think it is. I think it's a good conversation starter, possibly not great for this format, because, yeah, obviously, if you have like, if you have a conversation where you just say, oh, where do you think we should get our morality from, our sense of purpose, you could have a very interesting conversation with someone about that. Problem is here, obviously, is necessarily confrontational. I already said I don't really think so for me, I don't think Peterson is a Christian. I'll also say this: anyone who talks about being Christian for political reasons, I'm very suspicious of. I'm no fan of Islam, but when people say, oh, I'm a Christian because I'm really concerned about the Islamization of the West, and I think that Christianity is going to return us back to some fantastic time, well, that's not really what it's about, is it? It's about, what did Jesus achieve on the cross? If your Christianity isn't Christ-centered, but is Muslim-centered, like, oh, what are we going to do about all these Muslims? We're going to convert Christianity and Deus Vult and Reconquista. That doesn't really sound like Christianity. It sounds like anti-Muslimanity.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing?
Maybe it's just culture Christian. I think that's fine. Yeah. I've always said, in some sense, like, being a culture Christian doesn't make much sense to me, because I think Christianity is a very claims-focused religion, as opposed to something like, honestly, I mean, Judaism, but Buddhism, even if we're being honest, Catholicism, where, like, there's a lot more, like, ritual to it. There's a lot more you could get out of it, conceivably, without actually believing the claims are true. Whereas, obviously in the Bible, it literally says, and I'm not going to give you the exact verse, I believe it's in Corinthians, where it says, if Christ, and in fact, it was literally in the video that I responded to last week, if Christ has not risen, then our hope is in vain. And that's a very, like, that pretty much says it all. You can't really be a cultural, well, you can, again, but I think there's less you're getting out of it. Like, I would genuinely say, even as a Christian myself, if you're just looking into Christianity for the sake of, like, culture and a sense of belonging, in the same way that you might, I mean, I think there's fully atheist, secularistic ways that you can have a kind of pseudo spirituality, like you can do meditation and stuff like that. I would probably say, well, maybe not being Christianity would,
Doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, wait, what was that? What was that? Oh, so did he say with science?
Mr. Canada.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How
What's
are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
That's I was going to say, like, if he said with science, I could understand Peterson like picking up on that, because you could say, well, science, you would use science for your morality and purpose, maybe, so you can find it with science, you just can't find it in science itself. But he objected to in, like, why does that? This is this is something that annoys me. People being unnecessarily particular with their words, and like as if they're correcting me. Like, I don't know, I felt like if I was speaking to someone, I just like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, I sit down, like, I thought it was really interesting what you said about, you can't find morality in science. He goes, no, within science. I'm like, okay, we're not gonna, sorry, I may in the future use some prepositions that you don't like, so I guess we can just end this conversation now, because otherwise you're going to be interrupting me every 5 seconds, because I'm going to say, with and in and at and to and from, and you're going to like have a problem with me not saying the exact thing you think I should be saying.
No, within science.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals, an older individual was found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth.
Yeah, see, this is one of those things, like, I'm inclined to skip this simply because essentially the only thing that atheists can do in the situation, again, this isn't really an atheism thing, is either sit down and agree with Peterson and pivot the conversation to something else and say, but there are other things from a kind of atheist naturalistic worldview by which you can like establish a sense of morality, or they're going to try and contend it. The problem is you really can't contend this. Like, what he's saying here, for example, is, well, when we look at the history of humanity, we see humans behaving morally. Okay, but you can also, like, you can go back and you can look at Neanderthals healing each other's bones and like helping each other out and stuff like that. But you can also go back in history and look at them smacking each other in the head with clubs and killing each other. So like, the problem is you can see what they're doing, but to tell you should they or should they not have been doing these things ethically, that's not a scientific question. So the other guy is arguing badly. Yes, I would say it's very, very difficult. I think it's impossible to argue this case well, though. And again, I would stress, I don't think it's impossible. There are philosophers who are, I would reckon, a lot smarter than me, who have tried to ground moral realism in atheism and in naturalism. And I think that is possible. I would certainly say that someone can argue that better or worse. But the problem is the specific statement here is within science. And I don't think anyone, like, I don't think there's anyone who would be stupid enough to try and claim, apart from people who just completely misunderstand philosophy and haven't thought it through for a second, and will say things like, well, morality can be derived from science because nature shows us like that it's natural to behave a certain way. All right, but when you look at, I mean, a lot of like the way that like nature progresses in animals is through non-consensual acts of reproduction, for example. Like, that's a thing that happens in the natural world, and obviously that's not moral. So
Still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt.
Skip it. Boring, predictably bad arguments. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. So interestingly, they are talking about this one for very long, but let's look at like the last few seconds.
Protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them
give
in your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because
I
you don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like, I could ask
It's
you.
just a basic
Like,
hypothetical.
you
I actually really want to know what this is.
there ever be a circumstance like
You define belief. Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but
I'm actually really interested, like, about this one. Just see.
so do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. He's like this all the time. I'm literally like, oh, let me just skip to a random point in a video. And the first thing we hear is, do you believe in God? The thing is, I was like thinking, okay, maybe he'll say like, "What do you mean by all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good?" Those would be like, like that is a situation where those terms are sufficiently ambiguous that you could actually say, "Well, what do you mean by all-knowing?" Well, all-knowing is a bit of a difficult one because, like, or rather, all-knowing is actually, I suppose, a simple one. In that, I think you can maybe say like, there's fewer contradictions there. But for example, all-powerful, well, you have the problem: can God make a boulder that is so heavy he can't lift it? That's like a paradox, because either if he can't, well, then that's something he can't do. But if he can, well, then he's created a boulder that he can't lift, which means there's something he can't do. He can't lift it. If all powerful means he can do anything, well, that doesn't work. And then obviously all good. I mean, heck, you could have a whole line of inquiry around there about, I mean, obviously you can do the urethro, except it's I've always pronounced it urethro. I guess just because of urethra. But I found I actually like thought recently, let me actually look at the way this is spelled. And I was like, oh wait, because I was going to do a video where I mentioned so it's Eufifro. I don't know. It's good. I can default to my slightly more regional southwestern accent, whereby sorry, southeastern accent, whereby I don't pronounce my ths properly, so I don't have to worry about what's a ph and a th and all that.
You think it to be true?
That's the circular definition.
Oig, it's not a circular definition. Okay, I'm done. I'm not. I'm skipping. Like I was like, oh, that looks like it could be interesting. Oh goodness me. Do you think like what are the odds that any of the comments are, like positive? After 4 hours is so funny. Okay, can we do another one but have Jordan Peterson surrounded by 20 Christians? I think this would be equally interesting. I think it would be more interesting, right? I think it would be very, because the problem is you have atheism, which yes, I do think it does make, like, I did say that I would define atheism as the claim that God does not exist. But even though that's an active claim, it's still a claim about the absence of something. So it leaves all sorts of questions open about what you actually believe. So the problem is you have atheism, which is not like a really set worldview. And then you have Jordan Peterson, who again has at best an ambiguous worldview that's really hard to discern what he's actually saying. That's not a very interesting conversation. It's no belief versus might as well be no belief because it's so unclear what's actually being said. What would be way more interesting, definitely, is Jordan Peterson with his prevaricating ambiguity up against someone who's going to say, no, God exists. He sent his son to die for you so that in believing in him, you could have eternal life. No, not you can achieve some kind of spiritual mental awakening by understanding Jesus as a mythological metaphor about, like, I don't know, human ascendance or whatever. No, it's a true false statement. I actually need to go for a I need to one, go for a tinkle. Two, get my chamomile tea. If you're new here, what I do is I don't know if this is really stupid. I have a reason why I do it, which is basically I like to have a chamomile tea before I go to bed, and it feels like absurdly early. Obviously, I start recording or start streaming at 8:30. Seems absurd. Oh, hello. You know what? I have to go. Oh, it's you. Let me go off that. Okay, one moment. I remembered last week I said, hey, you know, I actually do, believe it or not, somehow I managed, have a wife. You know, she's sufficiently enthused by me that she would be willing to, you know, do something like get me a chamomile tea. So I was like, hey, could you just bring it up? So that's the thing. Right. So questions. Wait, Jordan is insanely furious. That guy should be terrified. Yeah, he has a vibe to him that I just don't know what to make of. He kind of reminds me of David Lynch, but that could just be me like taking confusing kind of creepy guys and just combining them together. Anyway, do you think you have to be religious to follow deontology, utilitarianism, etc.? No. Another question, because the thing is, look, you can have your own subjective ethical framework no matter what. So those systems of they don't even have to be objective, right? Now, do you have to be religious to have an objective morality? I think that's another question. I don't have a strong opinion about it. Right. Thank you. You can put it anywhere.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. I wish they got Ed Phase. I don't even know who that is, or another actual apologist against the atheists in the same way they had Alex O'Connor against Christians. Yeah. Well, that's the weird thing, right? There are so many. I mean, like Wes Huff has been recently like really blowing up as a Christian apologist. Dave, have they ever had David Wood on there? I would say like, the big Christian apologists. Well, you know, maybe this is gonna date me a bit. William Lane Craig. He's, you know, and I'm not saying whether or not they're like I agree with them, whether or not I think they're smart. I'm just saying prominent. William Lane Craig, David Wood, James White. James White is also a bit of a I don't know. He's got like a bit of an attitude. One of the things he has is like he's really particular about making sure like people put doctor at the start of his name because he's a doctor. And you know, I think that's a bit, you know, arrogant, right? Yeah, okay. David Wood is the anti-Islam guy, right? Yeah, basically. He defends Christianity. I mean his defenses of Christianity that I've seen aren't that great. I've seen him do two debates, and one of them was he basically made the presuppositional argument, which I don't think is terrible, but again, I don't think it is a productive discussion to be having at length. I think the presuppositional thing is basically just a drop it and then leave it. It's like maybe it can plant a seed. Like someone can say, "Oh, I never really thought about that. Like, what is my basis for thinking? You know, certain questions about the world." But you know, like again, someone's unlikely to be like told, "Oh yeah, I literally can't believe in truth unless God exists." So it's unlikely. And the other one he did was very much focus on the historicity of the resurrection, which again, it's a very nitty gritty conversation. So, would you ever respond to genetically modified skeptic? I believe I actually do have a GMS video lined up in my thingy. I actually didn't. I said that this was not the video I was supposed to be responding to today. The video I was supposed to be responding to today was about. It was from because essentially last week I did Christian says why he's no longer Christian. I was actually going to respond to a video by a very small channel that I just happened to pop up, which was a ex-Protestant explaining why they're not a Protestant. Now, this kind of helps with this. Which Christian denomination do you identify with? Or rather, with which Christian denomination do you identify? I'm just kidding. Baptist. I would identify myself, broadly speaking, as an evangelical, but yes, a Baptist. Yes, David Wood debated Alex O'Connor. That was an interesting one because I often thought of David Wood. I think he can be a little bit like arrogant. So I saw like people like when the debate happened, I saw people like, "Oh, David Wood comes across so pompous and so horrible and like a real, you know, numpty here." And then I was like, "Oh, whatever." But I was like, I watched it. I was like, "No, this is actually like it was a really fun debate." Like David Wood was like making jokes, but like Alex seemed to enjoy the jokes. There was only one moment where he seemed a little bit like aggressive, and that was in response to a question from the audience. But yeah, I thought it was very unimpressed, or rather, I thought that the idea that he had behaved poorly just wasn't evident at all. Thoughts on the Shroud of Turin? I think it's a hoax. I don't nothing about it makes sense to me. I don't think Jesus actually had long hair, which is one thing, right? Like the Shroud of Turin like looks like the paintings that you see of Jesus in like medieval artwork, and that tells me that some like pleb tier fraudster said, "Oh, I know what Jesus would look like. Yeah, he'd look like what some guy in like 1000 AD painted of what he'd look like," and that's got to be it. No, I think that Jesus probably looked very different from what we would think he looked like, and the Shroud. That's not my only reason. I mean, I just think it sounds like nonsense to me that we actually have like the impression of his face and that it looks so like it looks so fake.
Possible, restricted, hypothetical, with no precursors to back me into a
How's
corner,
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice.
even though they might not know it.
Everybody watches something, including FSC, even though they might not know it. Boring. You know what? Right. I want to do something else. I'm going to very briefly. All right. So here's the thing, guys. I'm going to be arrogant for a moment. You know what? Actually, I just clicked off the video. I shouldn't have done that, but I'm going to be arrogant about something. I heard some comments.
In a way, it's kind of just
oh goodness me! Did you just hear that noise? Yeah, I guess you did. That was my own voice. Yeah, I got some comments on my video. Ex-Christian explains why. So let me just bring that back up. So here, oh, that's way too big. Okay, there we go. Oh, way too small. Right. I got some comments on this video, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I had like one thread, and I guess like what I want to do is I want to go through a thread because I think it is it's going to be edifying for a few reasons. First of all, I hope it will demonstrate to people that this idea that atheists just like, because I've genuinely like, I remember one time I spoke to an atheist who literally said in a discussion on religion, an atheist will always run rings around a Christian and just look so much more smart than I was like, are you serious? Like, have you ever like spoken to an atheist before? Like a lot of the time, you know, they really don't present themselves super great. And also I think it'll be useful in terms of seeing how not to argue. So I think it's going to be fun. And I really wanted to do it because I just thought I was like, I don't want to waste all my time having this conversation just buried in my comment section. So, and I think we'll introduce some fun questions and it's more worth doing than Jordan Peterson thing. So we're going to do that. So I will say this, like you can see a lot of people complaining about the idea anyone who deconverts is not a real Christian. It makes it hard to take you seriously. I just like respond saying, hey guy, there is actually one funny comment here. It's from the same guy. The guy who I'm mostly interested in is called like shrimp something. So yeah, all right. So I say, this guy basically says, so this is the last thing I read. It is funny how you Christians love to go around claiming we have free will, but if you go to hell, it's because we decided to reject God. But the moment somebody actually decides to reject your religion, you suddenly can't believe it. Oh wait, no, where's the comment? Oh, here it is. Okay. You reject very mundane claims while defending very absurd supernatural claims. And then I say, explain to me how rejecting the one true God after having encountered him and sincerely believed in him is a mundane claim. So what I'm saying here is, from a Christian perspective, it would make sense to be skeptical of people who claim to be ex-Christian. Because from a Christian perspective, if you think someone was sincerely a Christian, then you believe that God exists and that this person realized that the one true God exists, and then they walked away from that. That's not a mundane thing to believe. So, or not a mundane thing to have happened. So I'm saying, you know, if you're objecting to me as a Christian, like being skeptical about someone claiming to be an ex-Christian, you can't say, well, someone stopping believing in Christianity is very mundane, because no, from a Christian perspective, it's not. And then, someone said, so this is the guy, Shrimp Cracker is his name. I'd reckon the same way it's unremarkable that people can stop believing in the one true Santa Claus. And I say, how is that unremarkable? And he says, is that a joke, or do you honestly believe in Santa Claus? So what you notice here is, here's the thing, okay? What I'm saying here is, if, seeing as I'm a Christian, we're talking about the one true God, it would not be remarkable. And this guy says, well, what about the one true Santa Claus? So I'm saying, all right, so this guy's saying, if there was a one true Santa, if the Santa Claus actually existed, would it be unremarkable for someone to believe in Santa Claus and then stop believing in him. And I'm saying, how is that unremarkable? Because, well, hold on, if Santa Claus actually exists, well, then actually it would be kind of weird for someone to believe in Santa Claus. I see that Santa Claus exists and then stop believing in him. So I say, yeah, I don't, but you said the real Santa Claus. So obviously, since that's a premise we're starting with, we're assuming that Santa really exists. If Santa really exists and somebody has a good reason to think Santa exists, and I like give an example, wouldn't it be remarkable for them to suddenly stop believing in Santa? And, you know, then I'm like elaborating, saying like, look, if we lived in a world where lots of people said Santa existed and they qualified that belief by saying they'd experienced something that made them believe Santa exists, then if someone says, I used to believe in Santa like you guys, but now I don't, then that claim it would make sense to view it with a lot of suspicion. If we're talking about a world where Santa actually exists and lots of people saying, hey, I encountered Santa. So essentially what I'm saying is, if you are making this like similar to God, then actually you, in doing so, you show why it is quite a remarkable thing. And then, so this guy says, we cannot start with the premise assuming Santa exists. This is a core flaw in your epistemology. You must reject unproven premises. This is why I point out the fact that you do not understand what evidence is. And I say, but we did start with the premise that Santa exists. It was right there in your words. Here's the thing, right? A lot of people get very confused about circular arguments. It is legitimate in many, many discussions to assume a premise. Because, and literally, the best example of this is an argument from contradiction. In an argument from contradiction, you start by assuming the thing that you're trying to disprove is true. But a lot of atheists, what they will do is they will say something like, I do not believe in the Bible because the Bible contains lots of supernatural events. To which the response would be, but if the Bible is true, then God exists, and therefore those supernatural events would make complete sense. So you can't say that you can't say it's evidence against the Bible that the Bible contains supernatural claims, because within the parameters that the Bible establishes, it would make complete sense for supernatural claims to be occurring. You can say that you do not agree with those parameters, but you can't say that the supernatural claims themselves make the Bible a flawed, incorrect book, because within the what the Bible is setting up, that would make complete sense. And the atheist will say, oh, well, then you're assuming that God exists. I'm saying, no, I'm not assuming God exists. I'm saying, if you're going to argue against a worldview, you can't say that that worldview is wrong by assuming that that worldview has to be understood within a contradictory worldview. Obviously, if you and of course, what you'll notice there is actually that is basically circular reasoning, to say, I'm going to argue against you. And the reason I'm going to argue against you is by assuming that we have to first evaluate your religion within the confines of a contradictory worldview. Well, obviously, in that context, you are essentially starting with the assumption that religion is wrong in order to prove it's wrong. Well, if I started with the assumption atheism is wrong in order to prove atheism is wrong, you wouldn't think that was very smart, would you? So yeah, but all right, I want to. That's actually not the one I want to look. I wanted to go through this one because I think this one's more entertaining, mostly because it has. Let's see how we reached 86. Okay, so here we are, everyone. So I say, let's actually go back to the chat. I mean, where I said it, which is very
even by scholars who earn a living defending the Bible. The only non-gospel evidence offered is some variants of the claim that first century people believed that Jesus rose.
Which is very significant, right? Because often, if a whole load of people come to believe something, that is evidence that thing happened. Okay, so let's evaluate that statement. If a whole load of people come to believe something, that is evidence that thing happens often. Let's think about examples of things people have come to believe. All right, people have come to believe that Michael Jackson existed. People have come to believe that Beyonce existed. People have come to believe that Barack Obama existed, that Donald Trump existed. You know, that every single famous person, people have come to believe that they existed. Is the fact that they have come to believe that evidence that they actually existed? Yes, of course it is. If you said, what is your explanation for why people think that Barack Obama existed? And you've got two options. Well, option one, everyone just made it up. Everyone just woke up one day and randomly, for no reason, decided to start believing that Barack Obama existed. No, that doesn't really make much sense. What's the better evidence? Probably the fact he exists right now. The fact he existed. That, or, you could say Barack Obama was president. What is the most logical explanation for why the vast majority of people believe that Barack Obama was the president of the United States? I think probably the best explanation would be that Barack Obama was the president of the United States. So, and there are like many examples of that, where I would say for the vast majority of things, the majority of people believe the reason they believe that thing is because that thing is actually true. Now, note, by the way, I did not say, I mean, I literally use the word often, right? I did not say every single time that the majority of people believe something, or a significant number of people believe something, you know, the number of people to whom it would be directly relevant to believe this thing, that means that thing definitely happened. And this is another thing people don't seem to understand. Evidence for something does not mean that thing is true. Lots of things, if I tell you I had eggs for breakfast this morning, that is evidence for that me having eggs for breakfast, right? Like clearly me saying that, like my eyewitness testimony of having had eggs for breakfast this morning is that that is evidence. But guess what? I didn't have eggs for breakfast this morning. I had a smoothie. I had an oatmeal-based smoothie. But the point is, even though I was lying, it was still evidence. Was it the most conclusive evidence in the world? No, because I was lying. But the point is, it is evidence. That's something that people don't seem to understand. And it's something that atheists particularly seem to get tripped up on. When I say so-and-so is evidence for God, so-and-so is evidence for the fact that Jesus existed, I'm not saying so-and-so is such conclusive evidence that there's no way that this thing could possibly be the case unless God existed or unless Jesus was crucified or whatever. I'm saying it is a reason to believe it. And absolutely, if you are like remotely intellectually honest, you have to admit that lots of people claiming that Jesus rose from the dead is a reason to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Is it such a fantastic reason there's no way you could possibly disagree with it? No. I kind of want to look at the comments. Let's see. All right, okay, good. We've not got any other. But then he lost me with the Santa stuff. I'm sorry, are you unironically arguing Santa is not real? The fact that you think parents all over the world engage in some mass conspiracy where they secretly go out and buy presents for their kids, like all the parents in the world are doing this, that is insane. Anyway. Evidence is not a binary, lol. I don't know what you mean, because it kind of is, right? Like something either is or isn't evidence for something. That doesn't mean that all evidence, like, you're saying like lol as if you're refuting me. If the point you're making is that evidence can be better or worse for something, yeah, it can be, right? Like there is more convincing evidence and less convincing evidence. That's kind of the point I was making. Anyway, so as you can see there, I said, a pretty basic point. If people believe, if you are, remotely honest, you can admit that's true. So let's say, okay, if a lot of people believe in something, that is evidence that it is true. They say there are 1.2 billion Hindus all claiming Hinduism is true. Since Christianity and Hinduism are mutually exclusive, using your logic would tell us that this is evidence that Christianity is false. Yeah, it is, absolutely. The fact that there are many people who believe in something other than Christianity is evidence that Christianity is false. And that is literally an argument atheists give, right? So this guy's saying like, oh, your logic is so stupid. But I've literally spoken to atheists who've said the fact there are so many people who are not convinced of Christianity is a reason to doubt Christianity. Because if Christianity was true, why wouldn't everyone accept that? Why is it that there are so many people in other parts of the world who don't accept it? So, it's weird for an atheist to be like, oh, here's why your logic is really stupid, and then give an example of an actual argument atheists make. All right. You might want to have someone with an education in philosophy proofread your scripts, yeah. Guys, I don't know if you can tell, but this is scripted, my live streams. And look for logical fallacies so you can remove them before posting your response. Sorry, I just wanted to drink some tea. I pointed out one, appeal to popular belief, i.e. everyone believes the earth is flat, so Archimedes must be wrong about it being round. Here's an issue, right? I really dislike the concept of fallacies because I think for the most part, people's knowledge of fallacies is counterproductive to their capacity to think critically. Because if you call something a fallacy, then you get to turn off your brain and stop thinking about why it's actually wrong. The problem with saying the appeal to popularity fallacy is that there are many situations where, again, lots of people believing something is a good reason to think it's true. For example, if, I gave me singularly saying, oh, I had eggs for breakfast. What if every single person with whom I had breakfast is saying, oh, Michael had eggs for breakfast? Again, is it possible that they are all lying. They said, oh, let's all pretend that I had eggs for breakfast as a prank. Yeah, but what's more likely is that the reason everyone's saying it is because I had eggs for breakfast. So, and if someone said, well, actually, the reason why I think Michael had eggs for breakfast is because everyone says he does. Wouldn't you think a person is actually like not smart at all and is in fact a stupid moron if they say, oh, appeal to popularity fallacy? Like, that's the problem. Someone literally said the thing of like, oh, evidence is not a binary. Obviously that means there's ambiguity there. Fallacies are not binaries either, right? When someone's appealing to a popular belief to say, well, because this belief is so popular, you shouldn't reject that out of hand, because there are so many situations where the popularity of belief is good reason to think it's true. But obviously you shouldn't go the other way and just accept anything lots of people say. You have to actually use your own brain, which is, again, a much easier thing to do if you haven't got into the habit of just recognizing things as fallacies and then saying, oh, therefore it's wrong. But you can basically scroll anywhere in the video and catch one within a minute or two. Sometimes around 21-minute mark, you make an incredulity fallacy. I don't understand something, therefore my assertion is true. Again, I think that's a really stupid. What I'm almost guaranteeing that is I was saying, I don't understand this thing, therefore I can't possibly believe it's the case. And that's a pretty reasonable thing to say, right? If you tell me, oh, I have a new system whereby 2 + 2 = 5, and it's this new mathematical system, and you sit there and you explain this really complicated mathematical system where 2 + 2 = 5, and I say, well, I don't understand that, so I'm not going to believe it. Is that an incredulity fallacy? No, obviously not. Because we don't know how the universe began, you go on to give the divine fallacy. It's so awesome, therefore God. Again, this is the thing, right? The other thing about people who use these fallacies and they like tick them off like they're playing bingo is they're going to take like anything they can to be like, oh, look, see, you did this fallacy. Like at no point did I say this thing is super awesome, therefore it must be God. Right. What's the difference between believing in God and believing in woo-woo manifestation? I don't know, lots, right? They fundamentally explain different things. So God, like manifestation, is the idea that your beliefs have power, and in like basically your beliefs connect to the universe, and by like putting positive vibes into the universe, you will create the things that you want to happen. And that's just not really similar to God exists and all the reason people give that. What's your best argument for Christianity? If you had to try to convince an atheist, where would you start? It's a really difficult question because there's why did I become Christian, and there's what do I think would convince an atheist. So for me, I would say it's very difficult, because if someone, there's always going to be other explanations. So in some sense, I feel like the one that feels like it should be the most undeniable is essentially the cosmological argument, where you say, the universe began to exist, therefore it needs to have a cause, and that cause can't be a natural thing, therefore it must be a supernatural thing. It can't be a natural thing because the natural world is causal. And you can kind of go through, again, you have to like elaborate on it, but you can kind of go through it. The problem is that someone's always going to be able to say, well, we don't know what it is, but there could be something. And there's that point at which you cross from, I don't know what it is, but there could be something, to I don't know what there is, and I'm sufficiently convinced that I've explored all the possibilities of what it could otherwise be, that it has to be the thing that it appears to be. That line is somewhat arbitrary. I know that David Wood makes an analogy to the episode of Scooby-Doo. It's actually a Scooby-Doo movie where they discover that basically zombies, like they're actual like real zombies, but Fred keeps saying, oh, it could be animatronics, it could be makeup, it could be a holographic projection. And the thing is, you could say, well, even when you got like the zombies like run around chowing down on people, their limbs are falling off and stuff like that, there's always an explanation. And of course, this is the problem with like Richard Dawkins. I mean, it's the problem with the atheist epistemology in general that you saw from Richard Dawkins, where he was asked, what would convince you that God existed or does exist? And he said, Well, I don't think anything could, really, if I'm being honest, because even if I saw a message in the stars that said, Richard Dawkins, I am your God, and I'm real, or whatever, well, what's more likely, that the stars have suddenly rearranged themselves only for me, or that I've temporarily gone crazy? Like, that's the problem with the I guess, like, that's the issue, right? And I suppose maybe the thing to focus on would actually be the flawed epistemology of atheism. If you wanted a place to start, this wouldn't convince them in itself, but it would be a good place to start, which is the flawed epistemology of atheism is that the atheist position is basically, I'm only going to believe in something that coheres with a worldview that lines up with what I've heretofore observed. And if it's possible to explain something without fundamentally changing my belief of how the world is, I should always favor the explanation that means that I don't have to fundamentally change my belief how the world is. And that's essentially what Richard Dawkins is saying, right? He's saying, well, because I believe in a naturalistic world, I am always going to default to a naturalistic explanation unless it's literally impossible. But like he says, at any point, you could just completely lose your mind and just like become completely delusional and not be able to trust your senses. So actually, the answer here has to arrive at, as he's being honest, is never. He's never going to be convinced that the supernatural exists, because there's never going to be a situation where he can't say, well, I'm not going to change my fundamental worldview from a naturalistic one to a supernatural world unless the naturalistic world completely fails. But the naturalistic world can never fail because craziness explains everything. So I would maybe focus on that, because once you get someone to say, oh, actually, you're right, I can't just say, well, I'm going to wait until the naturalistic world or naturalistic explanation completely fails. Then they have to start thinking, well, at what point then, if it's, basically unfalsifiable and, therefore epistemologically suspect, to say, I'm going to wait until the naturalistic worldview completely fails, at what point does it flip over? And then you can return to the cosmological argument and say, well, hold on a minute. Yes, it could be many naturalists. Maybe the universe has existed in infinity, but does that really make sense logically to have an eternity of past events? And you can kind of ask those questions. But yeah, for me, I mean, that was a big part of it for me, because I should say I'm not, well, if I actually continue this, which I may be able to. So, right. So, and yet believers in the supernatural have known to lose that belief, which is also a fundamental change of worldviews. Well, that would work with what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is that it is good for a belief to be falsifiable, and therefore the fact that you can change your worldview is actually to your credit. What do you think about doing a live stream or a video discussing debating Christianity with a Catholic or an Orthodox Christian YouTuber? I think I would have to be at least a year deep into this before I would consider that, because I don't want to, that conversation would have to get really, really nitty gritty, and I would need to really want to make sure I understood a lot of stuff, because I don't want to. One thing I kind of found myself saying recently is that, again, I'm not trying to like just dunk on atheists, but I think atheism has the kind of biggest Dunning-Kruger problem of any religious kind of worldview as it relates to religion, in that it's very easy as an atheist to just think, oh, all this religion stuff is stupid, therefore I don't need to understand it, but because I understand how stupid it is, I'm really smart. When you're actually religious, you're much more likely to realize, oh, hold on a minute, there's like so much complexity to this and so much I don't understand. And yeah, certainly in my case, I feel like there's a lot I need to understand. Right. Let's continue. Right. Oh dear. So yeah, and as it stands, personally, I can see your video converting more people to atheism than Paul Odgiers, simply due to all the logical errors you're making. Best of luck in finding someone who has studied philosophy. If not, I recommend taking a class at your local college or night school. It'll help a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is very. So someone's going to watch my video and be like, I didn't realize Christianity was so false. Clearly, I need to convert to atheism, because atheism looks so credible compared to when you see how Rom 510 describes Christianity. Anyway, so I say, Essentially, I don't know if the comments of me kind of saying the same thing. So yes, absolutely, 1.2 billion people believing in Hinduism instead of Christianity is evidence that Christianity is well done. Where's logical fallacy in anything I've said? All right, and I say blah 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 blah. I kind of explain the concept of evidence. I say there's lots of evidence for why Christianity is false. All right. This guy says, I literally pointed out 3 examples of your fallacies. Why are you making me to? Why are you asking? So I read that wrong. Why ask me to point to them again? You can address those first, or just be content with your dishonest arguments are helping people. Let's try this again. Helping drive people away from Christianity. So. And I kind of say, I say, let me help you out here. What you should do if you're capable of intelligent thought is explain why something I said is wrong, not just label it as a fallacy. That's not what intelligent critical thinkers do. Okay, this is where it gets entertaining. All right. So I explained that it's wrong because it's fallacious. To say lots of people believing in it is evidence of it is entirely wrong. I showed you why it's wrong using examples of both different religions and why it's wrong using flat earthers as an example. I can get into why it's wrong to say we don't. Okay, and then he says other stuff, but we'll move on to the. So I say, dude, you didn't show why it's wrong using examples of different religions. I literally agreed that lots of people believing in Hinduism is true, is evidence that it's true. So how is that showing me why this belief is wrong? That's the thing, right? You'll notice that the thing is, you can't show me why lots of people believe this is evidence it's true is wrong, because it's not wrong. Lots of people believing in things is evidence it's true. This person says, well, that would mean that there's evidence Hinduism is true. Yeah, there absolutely is evidence Hinduism is true. I would say, like, literally, I was talking to someone last weekend about what religion is in like second place. What religion do I think is the most credible religion after Christianity? And I said Hinduism. And if I was to be grilled on, like, someone said, list off a load of reasons why you think Hinduism is pretty credible. One of the first ones I would mention is, well, lots of people believe it's true, right? Like, to me, it seems very unlikely to me that the perfect true religion is just like some guy called Greg who's just like privately believing it, and like that's the true religion. No, it seems very likely to me that if the supernatural exists, then it would interact with people in such a way that the correct belief would rise to the forefront. I mean, also, again, it's generally a safe bet that lots of people believing something is going to be more likely to be true than the one person on the sideline saying, actually, it's this thing instead. Again, it's not impossible that can happen, but usually if you have 1,000 people telling you one thing, I feel like I made a weird voice in my mouth there, a weird noise in my mouth there. If you have 1,000 people telling you one thing and one person telling you something else, and it's about, like, I don't know, something they've seen or whatever, then you're probably going to believe the 1,000 people and think, oh, this one guy's a liar. I really need to, like, sort out my... I should be watching something because it's really difficult to have my little tea breaks. Anyway, so I very much did. You just didn't understand, it seems. My point is that a lot of people believe in Hinduism isn't evidence it's true, but it is evidence it's true. If you use that logic, every Christian denomination believes that the other denomination are wrong, and Christianity itself would be evidence that Christianity is wrong. All right. So, yeah, look, I would say that more people believing in Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy than a specific denomination of Baptist, or even like Baptist in general, that is slight evidence for Catholicism being true as opposed to Baptist. The same logical fallacy is wrong because you're arguing that because there are a lot of flat earthers out there, it's evidence that the earth is flat. It simply isn't. Of course, well, the issue there, is that lots of flat earthers, far more people believe the earth isn't flat. So, like that doesn't even apply there. And he says, this is why I think your video is more prone to lead people towards atheism than Pelagia's, because the arguments you're making are very poorly thought out. Notice, I haven't made a single error yet. I've said, lots of people believing a thing is evidence it's true. And I've said, so, for example, lots of people believing Hinduism is evidence Hinduism is true. Lots of people believing Christianity is evidence that's true. Lots of people being atheists is evidence atheism is true. People believing things is evidence that thing is true. And yeah, so you hear me say here, lots of people believing in Hinduism is evidence that it's true, though. The fact there are a lot of flat earthers is evidence that the earth is flat. What part of this is poorly thought out? What's the error in what I'm saying? Again, now I will stress this. You might say, well, what do you mean? The fact there are lots of flat earthers is evidence that the earth is flat. If someone came to Earth and the first thing they did is land at a flat Earth conference, and they saw 1,000 people. Well, I guess if they landed on Earth, they'd probably see the Earth wasn't flat on the way in. But the point is, if the first thing you encountered was 1,000 people telling you the Earth is flat, you would say, "Oh, I guess the Earth is flat then." You have a reason now to think the Earth is flat. 1,000 people telling you that is a pretty good reason. If you then step outside the Flat Earthers Conference and find out that billions of other people think the Earth is a globe, you now have a very good reason to think that the Earth is a globe. That's like how evidence works. Anyway, it really isn't, and that's your problem. No, that's the problem, sorry. Lots of people believe in Harry Potter. Is that evidence that Harry Potter is true? No, it's simply evidence that people exist who believe it to be true. You'll notice we're kind of falling apart already, right? People believe in Harry Potter. Do people believe in Harry Potter? But then I say, and I kind of like respond to that, look, lots of people believing Harry Potter actually exists would be evidence that Harry Potter is true. Yeah, absolutely. If there were 1 billion people who will say, no, Harry Potter's true. Like, I met him and he was casting spells. And yeah, I saw him, like the real Harry, and he had the scar and everything. If 1 billion people tell me that, I'm going to take it seriously. More seriously than I would take it if nobody was saying it. This is, again, the thing you have to understand. That people saying things are true is evidence they're true is so obvious. You just have to think for a second and think, oh, if I suddenly met a massive number of people who was claiming something is true, would that potentially increase my suspicion or maybe my confidence that it was true? If you're not going to say yes to that, I genuinely don't really know how your brain works. So this guy says, I think that enlightens us of the core reason of your misunderstanding. If you believe that many people believing in Harry Potter is evidence that Harry Potter is true, you have no understanding of what evidence is, and you have no understanding of what truth is. I'm not sure of a nicer way to put that. Again, like, you don't have to be nice to me. Again, what I'm saying is so obviously true here that people believing something gives you reason to think it's true. And I say, like, hey, you don't understand how truth works, which again, is so obvious, right? If you're saying to me, oh no, actually, if I met literally, if every single person in the world oh, hello. I think we've got the wrong microphone. Uh-oh, let's fix this. Can you hear me? I need to change my microphone to the right one. Not microphone, camera. I hate this. I hate this. That's not right. Oh, how do I? Wait. Can I? If I click leave studio, can I come back, or does that end? It probably ends the stream, doesn't it? Yeah, for some reason it disconnected randomly, and I don't know why that would happen. And I don't know. The problem is, like, now it's disconnected, it's not recognizing it, and the easy way to connect it would be to. I mean, the good news is I'm super small. It doesn't matter. I think we should just power through. But yeah, I wanted to address this. All right. Someone said, I don't know how much you missed, but I don't think it really matters. Someone says, I think there's a semantic problem here. If lots of people think Hinduism is true, that means that Hinduism is a real religion, not the claims of Hinduism are true. No, It's not semantic. If people, so I'm going to continue directing to this camera, even though this isn't the camera that's working anymore. No, people thinking Hinduism is true. Obviously, that proves that Hinduism is a real religion, but it also is evidence that Hinduism is true. This isn't a semantic problem. Again, I genuinely don't understand how people's minds work if they can't accept that that lots of people claiming things is evidence that that thing is actually true. Anyway. Yeah, so someone says, all right, let's try it this way. At its core, an appeal to popularity argument is flawed because it's not relevant to the outcome. Lots of people believing the Earth was flat was not evidence the Earth was flat. We measured it and the truth was it's round. An argument is both sound and valid if the conclusion follows from true premises and does not rely on accepting the conclusion as part of the premises. Arguing popularity is just that. The conclusion becomes smuggled in as the premise, invalidates the whole argument because it becomes circular. That's not true, by the way. It's not a circular argument, right? There's nothing circular about saying people believe this thing is true, therefore this thing is true. That's just wrong. Lots of people believe in things that are true. Lots of people believe in things that are false. The belief or lack thereof is in a truth claim. So, okay, let's stress this. There is evidence for things that are false. Again, if you do not understand this, you seriously do not understand epistemology. Imagine a court case. Are you saying that there cannot be evidence for somebody being guilty if they are innocent? No, of course there can be. So the fact that people can believe false things does not prove that people's belief in something is not evidence for that thing, because there can be evidence for false things. I really wish my microphone was better. Are people still complaining about that? Right. So, and I basically say here, except popularity is relevant to outcome. People are more likely to believe something if the thing is true, and more people believe something, the more likely it is that, or, I kind of just repeat myself. But yeah. And I say for everything the majority of people believe that's false, there are innumerable things most people believe that are true. And that's the thing, right? The vast, that's pretty obvious. The majority of things that the majority of people believe are true. Because it's the majority of things the majority of people believe are obvious things, like 2 + 2 = 4, water is poison, water isn't poison, things fall towards the earth, the sky is blue. Right. We just go back and forth on this point again. He tries to say the majority of people believing Christianity is false is evidence that it's false. And I say, yes, of course. Absolutely, yeah. Again, this isn't a hard principle to grasp. The majority of people believing something is evidence it's false. So he says, so do you mind editing the video where you made the opposite claim that actually it's evidence that it's false rather than true? If that's too much, maybe add it to the description and pin comments so people aren't misled. And I say, where did I ever make the opposite claim? And then he says, at the timestamp I linked. We just saw the timestamp I linked. And I said, the fact lots of people believe it is evidence it's true. I did not say that the fact that the majority of people believe it means it's more likely true than not. Because that would be inaccurate, because the majority of people don't believe in Christianity. But actually, I didn't say that, right? And it's worth noting, by the way, the large number of people who believed it are people who were specifically situated to, in the 1st century Near East, as opposed to nowadays, where a lot of people who don't believe it obviously are in very different places and very far removed from it. But whatever, right? So, yeah, what I say there, that's me saying the position I've been saying all along. People saying something happened is evidence that the thing happened. I never contradict that belief the whole time. So, yeah, that's the thing. The one thing you can't deny here is that this guy thinks he's got me in some kind of bind or something where he's proving me wrong, even though, as you can see, I've just been saying the same thing this whole time. So, and he says, no, sir, you just acknowledged that the majority of people at the time of Paul is referring to believe that Christianity is false. Ergo, your logic, we should take that evidence as Christianity is false. In the video, you spin it as the minority believe it to be true, so we should take that as evidence that it's true. You need to be consistent. Yeah, because I haven't been consistent here, have I? Remember that time when I said that the majority of people believing something is not evidence that thing is true? When more people believe something to be false than true, isn't that evidence that it's false by your logic? Shouldn't you take that be, no, Paul is wrong? Actually, we should take the majority of people at the time believe that it's false as evidence Christianity is false. And I say, I didn't spin it as anything. I said, lots of people think something happened is good evidence it happened. That's all I said, which is the position I stand by. There's literally no inconsistency here. And yeah, basically just, and you really need to get better at comprehending what people are saying. Good luck with that. Again, I don't know. I kind of want to like, he says, I'm not sure I understand the point of this channel. Is it to make Christians look bad? Is it just trolling? Is it to convert more people to atheism? What is the goal here? And I say, hey, is it okay if I go through this entire comment thread in my next live stream? I want to make fun of you. Yeah, like I genuinely just don't understand why someone can be so confidently wrong. Yeah, exactly. He doesn't realize that there can be evidence for both atheism and theism. This is such a simple point. Anyway, so let's see. Yeah, and I say the point of this channel is to present apologia for Christianity from the perspective of someone who grew up as an atheist and was convinced by the evidence that, to become a Christian. He says, interesting if true, what evidence convinced you? And he says, I see you replying to other threads. What did you stop? Why did you stop replying when I asked you for the evidence that convinced you? It's good. If it's good evidence, I would be convinced myself. I'd like to know what evidence convinced you so I can evaluate it properly. And I'm like, I didn't see the comment. Maybe it got flagged by YouTube for some reason. And then he's like, my comment was literally the words. Anyway, whatever. He's like basically accuses me of like randomly, which is like so funny. He's like, you deleted my comment, which first of all, the comment's right here. But second of all, why would I randomly, like 50 comments deep into a thread, be like suddenly, oh, no, Buster, I'm not, anyway, stupid. Again, I think the issue is that you think that the phrase evidence is too strong. Like that's the problem, LMC Figs. Evidence can be incredibly weak. There is nothing strong about evidence. If I tell you that I'm like putting up 2 fingers right now, sorry, that's like a swear thing. If I tell you I'm putting up 3 fingers, that's evidence that I'm putting up 3 fingers. Me telling you that is evidence. That doesn't mean it's strong. It just means it is evidence. There's a really important like line from The Simpsons where the judge says, "Does the defense have any actual evidence?" And Lionel Hutz says, "Well, we have lots of speculation and hearsay. Those are kinds of evidence." Now, obviously, yeah, the point he's making there is it's not good evidence, but it is evidence. Like if this was a discussion about is people believing in Christianity good evidence Christianity is true, it would be a very different discussion. But he didn't say that. He said it's not evidence, and it is evidence. It's like I would, if you are convinced that, like, if someone says to you, sorry, let me rephrase that. If you as an individual are convinced Christianity is true simply by the fact that lots of people believe Christianity, then I think you aren't very smart. But I also think you're not very smart if you don't accept it as evidence at all. So it says, so you don't know what the difference between a claim and evidence is. A claim is evidence, right? Making a claim of something is evidence. If okay, here's an example, right? Oh, God, I can go back to the same thing. I had eggs for breakfast. That is both a claim and it is evidence of that claim, because the fact I'm telling you that is, evidence is true. Anyway, so then I say, all right. I like point out, why would I randomly delete the comment, whatever. Okay, so he says, what evidence convinced you? I said, I basically say, that's not really germane to the topic of this video. You're welcome to stick around and I'll let you know. So basically I'm like, look, this deep into the comments, I don't really want to talk about that, but whatever. He says, like, I asked what the point of this channel is. You said the point was to show why you converted from atheism. Anyway, so I basically have like a thing where I'm like, look, I'm not gonna like do the entire point of my channel in this like random comment thread here. But okay, then he says, like, to be fair, he keeps saying, he says, I'm not asking you to make your entire case. I'm simply asking for a piece of evidence. Let's just go with the number one piece of evidence that convinced you. What was the number one piece of evidence that convinced you? So that's like actually a good thing to do that, because I was like, look, I don't want to like present to you the completely comprehensive case for why I'm a Christian in this comment, because that's like obviously a really big thing to do. Say, can you explain to me why you changed your entire worldview? So I was like that's like a waste of my time. But then he says, well, it's number one piece of evidence. So I said, number one piece of evidence is the theological coherence of the Bible. This is where it gets entertaining. Oh, hello. Wait. Well, I didn't have an issue with how you put it in that video, which was different, if I remember correctly. Okay, that's cool. I mean, I don't think there was a huge difference, but yeah. Uh, yeah, absolutely. You saying that the tooth fairy is real is evidence that the tooth fairy is real. It's incredibly bad evidence, but it is evidence. Because, like, what if you actually saw the tooth fairy? That would be significant, and you are reporting that you actually saw the tooth fairy. Yeah, that's a testimony. That's evidence. I mean, I will say, I suppose, like, the one thing you could say is, well, is there a difference between saying, like, oh, I saw this thing versus just saying, like, I believe it? And maybe there's a difference. But, like, I suppose it would depend if he's, like, what your reasoning is for, like, the basis for the claim. Like, if you're saying, well, I believe the tooth fairy is real because I felt the tooth fairy. I experienced the tooth fairy. Well, that would be evidence, because then you're giving some testimony of something. If you say your tooth fairy is real because you saw the tooth fairy, well, then you're definitely giving testimony of a thing that happened. I'm actually just going to power through this, even though it's technically past my time, but I just found this comment thread really fun. So, someone says, I don't follow. The Bible is the claim. It can't be evidence for itself. If that were the case, the existence of Spider-Man comics would be held in the same regard as evidence for the pantheon of the Spider-Verse. And I say, if you don't understand, you're welcome to continue to watch my content with the expectation I may elaborate on it at some point. And I say, look, I was an atheist. This convinced me. So, okay, this guy, like, I'm not interested in really talking about this, like, again, but he says, theological coherence. Is it theologically coherent that the resurrection, the most theologically important part of the Bible, has 4 separate, conflicting, incompatible accounts? So he says, let's get this straight. In Matthew, Mary and another Mary meet an angel at the tomb with the stone in place, moved by an earthquake. In Mark, Mary with 2 women meet 1 man. Okay, and he basically just, like, goes through the kind of standard, oh, here are the inconsistencies of the gospel account or the resurrection account. He says, since they cannot be accepted together as theologically coherent, what method do we use to know which of the accounts are wrong? I say, let me just finish this. And I say, that's not a theological issue, right? That is because he says it's the most theologically important thing. But here's the thing. The theologically important part of it is that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And they all agree on that. The specifics of who did what when and how many people were there, that is a historical claim. Hello, bath time. You're late here. My camera isn't usually as bad. Something screwed up. Anyway, so look, and then I say, so he says, it very much is, but if you don't agree with that, question still stands, what method do we use to tell? And then, all right, this is basically where I pretty much destroy this dude. I say, well, it doesn't really matter, but just for the record, in John's gospel, it only mentions Mary, but then in the same account, she says, we, implying there's more than one of her. So that's, like, a really important thing. There is plenty of evidence that in old accounts, they would mention just one person, but that doesn't mean that was the only person there. And I say, so that establishes the precedent that it's possible more people were there than just mentioned in the account, and this would make the number of angels there not contradictory either. If we know only one person could be mentioned, while it's later strongly implied by the grammar that multiple people are there, then there's no issue here at all. They say, the only apparent contradiction then would be whether the stone was in place and then moved, or whether they came to the tomb with the stone already rolled away. However, if you actually look at it, there's no reason to think that the woman actually witnessed what's described in Matthew 28:2. So, if you don't know, here's the story, right? Paraphrasing, Mary goes up to the tomb, and there was an earthquake, and an angel rolled the stone away. That doesn't mean that Mary saw the thing that happened, or that it happened after she came up to the tomb. And here's the example I give. Like, I could say, I got to my driveway, and my housemate parked his car in my spot. That doesn't mean that I witnessed him do it after I got to the driveway. It means I can tell when I've got there, that's what happened, right? Like, you can understand, like I say, I got to my driveway and my housemate parked in my spot. Does that mean that I got there and then I, like, waited and saw my housemate once I got there driving to my spot? No, I got there and I saw that the housemate had parked in my spot, meaning I got there and my housemate parked in my spot. It's a very simple logic. So Mary went up to the tomb and there was an earthquake and the angel rolled the stone away. what that's saying is she got there and the stone had been rolled away. And the reason the stone had been rolled away is because there was an earthquake and the angel rolled the stone away. And then Mary came up and there was an earthquake. The angel rolled the stone away. The point being, that's her observing the effect of what just happened. So I say, and I say it here. So what I'd imagine is that several women came to the tomb to find two angels. They found the stone already rolled away, with one angel explaining that he had done that with a great earthquake. That's what I think happened. That doesn't require any of the accounts to be wrong. And then, this guy says, I'm sorry, but you didn't actually answer my question. What method did you use to determine the book of Matthew and John are incorrect? And I said, Matthew and John are absolutely unequivocally correct in the gospel accounts. And he says, and this is really good, you literally just said there's no reason to believe the account written in Matthew. Terrible reading comprehension. What I said was there's no reason to, did any of you misunderstand what I said there? Right? I'm saying that just because the event is described in Matthew 28:2 after the woman gets there doesn't mean that the woman witnessed the event itself. I'm not saying the event didn't happen, but this guy's saying there's no reason to think that it happened. Again, just a complete inability to understand anything. I don't know. I think I'm gonna have to jump ahead. But essentially, what happens is, even though I've made all of these points, this person keeps coming back to oh, you didn't actually. Oh goodness me, it goes on so long. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend going to this going to the comment section of this video and just checking out this whole comment thing, because it literally was just talking to a wall, where even though I already explained this is how logic, and again, you can actually say that doesn't really make much sense, right? You could argue against that, but I promise you, the person I was talking, that person, even after all that, I mean, how long was it after I made that point that they were still talking? At no point do they actually address the point I made about how actually there's plenty of evidence in the Bible of when one person is identified, but then it's clear from grammar that there are multiple people there. They don't address that, nor do they address the point that there is grammatical precedent for it being valid to say, I got to a place and this thing happened, not meaning that after I got there, the thing happened, but that in getting there, I discovered that that thing had happened. Someone says, which video is it? It's Ex-Christian Explains Why. I'll post it in the... So if I post it here, I think it will be from... Let's see. Does it come from StreamYard? Anyway. What do you mean? Oh, yeah, I gave up on that. It was boring. Let's see. Do people not know what the Bible is? A collection of real stock? Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I should go. Sorry about my cat. It will be really annoying if that happens earlier on in a stream and for something more important than Jordan Peterson, which I know is hard to imagine. Anyway, oh, look at that. It's awful. I really want to know if it's possible to fix that, because it's I click stop. What happens if I actively choose to unplug it and plug it back in? Let's find out. Yep, okay, screwed everything up there, didn't we? Oh, hello. Ah, I got it to work again. Okay, well, that's useful, kind of. So I now know for future reference that I can actually fix it just by unplugging it and plugging it back in. So thanks, everyone. Yeah, I honestly... I'm thankful you're all here for this, and you had some... I hope you had some fun. Bye, I guess. I went slightly over, which I shouldn't do. I just love when people are bad at arguing. Anyway, bye.